I was rinsing coffee mugs at my kitchen sink when a familiar silver sedan slowed on the gravel road and pulled to a halt at the edge of our property line. I recognized that vehicle instantly, my younger sister, Lauren. 2 years of radio silence, and there she sat, parked beside our gate, phone pressed to her ear, weeping so intensely her entire frame trembled. I watched her gaze at the structure before her. Our structure. The one my husband Nathan had constructed from salvaged timber and sheer determination. The one my father insisted we would never manage to afford. 2 years earlier, he had stared directly at me and uttered the phrase that reshaped everything. Those words ultimately cost him his business, his standing in our community, and both of his children. But the events at the charity banquet? That's the chapter. Welcome to Quiet Justice Tales. I'm Rebecca, 34, a certified public accountant who spent 7 years managing my family's financial records without charging a dime. This is the account of what unfolded when they presented my sister with $100,000 for her wedding celebration and informed me I wasn't worthy of any assistance. If you've ever invested yourself completely in people who couldn't recognize your worth, stay for this narrative. Leave a comment and subscribe. I grew up in a small Georgia town in a white clapboard house 3 blocks from the main street, where my father Robert operated Davis Hardware for 23 years. He launched it with borrowed capital from his parents when I was 11. My mother Margaret left her teaching position to manage the register, and for 2 decades, that establishment represented everything, our livelihood, our identity, our Sunday dinner conversation. I began handling the financial records when I was 25, freshly certified as a CPA. My father's previous accountant had retired. Replacing him would have cost $50,000 annually. I offered to manage it without compensation. I told myself it was a short-term arrangement. That was 7 years ago. Every quarter, I balanced the ledgers, submitted the tax documents, reconciled vendor statements, and processed payroll for 4 part-time employees. I identified a $15,000 billing discrepancy from a material supplier in my 2nd year. I renegotiated our insurance policy, saving them $7,000 each year. No one celebrated. No one expressed gratitude. The closest I received was my father scanning the quarterly report and remarking, "Seems accurate." The hardest part isn't being undervalued, it's realizing you've been volunteering for it. My sister Lauren was 3 years my junior. She worked at a boutique downtown, the sort of establishment that sold scented candles for $45 and imported accessories. Lauren was striking, magnetic, effortlessly photogenic. She was the one featured in the family Christmas card, the one my mother brought to church luncheons, the one whose engagement photograph occupied the mantel before the ring was even sized. I was the one with a filing cabinet in my spare bedroom and a spreadsheet open on Christmas morning. I didn't resent Lauren at that time. I resented myself for believing that if I just maintained the numbers correctly, the emotional ledger between us would eventually balance. Lauren became engaged on a Saturday in May. Bradley Turner, 32, a sales manager at the local dealership. He drove a leased SUV and wore timepieces that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. I didn't dislike Bradley. I didn't know him sufficiently to dislike him. What I observed, he tipped generously, spoke rapidly, and held opinions about everything except his own financial habits. The engagement dinner took place at my parents' residence. Pot roast, my mother's fine china, a bottle of champagne that cost more than the entire meal. Lauren extended her hand so everyone could admire the ring, 2.5 carats. Bradley beamed as though he'd won a competition. My father carved the roast. My mother kept refilling Lauren's glass. I sat at the far end of the table and ate quietly. Lauren began discussing wedding plans. A lakeside venue, 200 guests, a live band, a custom gown from a designer in Atlanta. Orchids imported from South America. We're estimating $80,000, Bradley announced as though quoting a vehicle price. Possibly more with enhancements. My parents exchanged a glance. Not concern, not hesitation. Something else. The look of people who've already reached a decision and are simply waiting for the appropriate moment to reveal it. I set down my fork. Not because I suspected anything, but because the atmosphere had changed. The air felt different. There's a particular silence that carries more weight than words. It lingers between people who possess information you don't. I'd been working with financial records long enough to recognize when the figures didn't align. Something was approaching. I simply didn't realize it would land directly on me. My father set down the carving knife, wiped his hands on his cloth napkin, and cleared his throat. "We've been discussing this," he said, glancing at my mother. Margaret nodded. "We're contributing $100,000 toward Lauren's wedding. She deserves the best possible start." The table fell silent. 100,000? As a gift? Lauren squealed with delight. Bradley shook my father's hand enthusiastically. Margaret teared up and embraced Lauren tightly. I remained seated, performing the mental arithmetic I couldn't stop. $100,000. That exceeded the annual profit of Davis Hardware by more than double. That surpassed everything I'd accumulated in my entire professional life. That represented 2 years of the bookkeeping I'd provided them without charge. I opened my mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "Nathan and I have been discussing marriage as well," I said. "Nothing extravagant. Perhaps a small ceremony at the courthouse," my father interrupted me. He fixed his gaze directly on me. Not past me, not through me. At me. "You don't deserve any assistance." Just like that. Delivered as though it were a final verdict. He continued. "Nathan doesn't have a legitimate career. His family experienced bankruptcy. I'm not wasting resources on a poor decision." No one reacted. Lauren examined her ring. Bradley sipped his champagne. Margaret folded her napkin into a perfect square and remained silent. I picked up my fork, set it down again, and rose from my seat. "All right," I said. "Nothing more." I carried my plate to the kitchen, rinsed it, dried it, and returned it to the cabinet. I walked to the front entrance, put on my coat, and drove home to the apartment I shared with the man my father had labeled a mistake. That was the final meal I consumed in that household. Margaret called the following morning at 7:30. I was at my desk reviewing a client's quarterly returns. "Your father didn't intend it that way," she said. No greeting. No inquiry about my well-being. Just damage control before breakfast. "He's concerned about you, Rebecca. Nathan is wonderful, truly. But he lacks financial stability." I allowed the word to linger. Stability. My mother had married a man who borrowed $40,000 from his parents, nearly lost everything in the first year, and spent 2 decades perpetually one bad quarter away from closure. Stability was a term she wielded like a shield, directing it at everyone else so she wouldn't have to examine her own choices. "I appreciate your concern," I said. "Was there anything else?" "Don't be that way. We're family. Then treat me like one." She had no reply to that. I ended the call and sat in the quiet for an extended period. Here's what I understood that morning, seated at my desk with the Georgia sunlight filtering through the blinds. My father's rejection wasn't truly about Nathan. Nathan was merely the excuse. The fundamental issue was control. My father required the world to conform to his blueprint: secure employment, conventional marriage, predictable outcomes. I had followed that blueprint for 7 years, maintaining his records, managing his risks. But the moment I selected something he hadn't approved, I transformed from an asset to a liability. And you don't invest in liabilities. My mother was different, yet the same. She had abandoned her teaching career to raise us. When I constructed my own profession, I became evidence that her sacrifice was optional. Lauren, who married early, remained nearby, required them, made Margaret's choices feel inevitable. I made them feel voluntary. They weren't punishing me for choosing Nathan. They were punishing me for demonstrating that they'd had alternatives all along. Lauren's engagement party occurred 3 weeks later at my parents' residence. 50 guests, catered event. I assisted with the arrangements because that was my role. I solved problems. I ordered the flowers, coordinated the food platters, printed the seating cards on my home printer at 11 o'clock the night before. It cost me $230 and 9 hours of effort. No one requested my help. No one had to. I arrived early, arranged the tables, hung the decorations, chilled the champagne. When the guests arrived, I retreated to the kitchen as I always did, the person ensuring the evening proceeded smoothly while everyone else enjoyed themselves. Margaret stood to offer a toast. She expressed gratitude to everyone who matters for being present for Lauren. She named the caterer. She named the florist. She named Bradley's parents who had driven from Savannah. She did not name me. Then she uttered the phrase. We can only invest our hearts in one celebration in this family. She looked at me when she said it, not with cruelty, but with something worse, certainty. As though it were obvious. As though I should have already understood my position. Bradley made a joke about the sister who crunches the numbers. Lauren laughed. My father laughed. The entire room laughed. I stood in the kitchen I had decorated, holding a champagne flute I had paid for, and something shifted. Not broke. Shifted, like a lock engaging. I had been volunteering for my own erasure. Every flower I arranged, every invoice I processed, every free hour I contributed. I was constructing the framework for a family that didn't include me. That evening, I drove home and did what I do best. I opened a blank spreadsheet and began calculating. Not their numbers. Mine. Nathan was on the couch sanding a piece of walnut when I entered. He could tell by the way I set down my keys. How severe? He asked. I told him everything. The toast. The exclusion. The laughter. The comment about one celebration. He set down the sandpaper. Nathan's family had experienced bankruptcy when he was 17. His father's business partner had drained the operating account and disappeared. They lost the house, the vehicles, the business itself, everything except each other. Nathan left school in his junior year, earned his GED at night, and spent the subsequent decade rebuilding his life one worksite at a time. He understood financial betrayal the way a burn survivor understands fire, not as an abstract concept, but as a permanent scar. Whatever you need, he said. But I want you to hear something. You've been carrying their burden without compensation. That's not family. That's employment. And employees receive payment. I sat beside him. I shared my two decisions. First, I would submit a formal resignation from Davis Hardware's bookkeeping. Not an email, a letter. Typed, printed, signed. I'm a CPA. I understand how to close an account. Second, I would stop attending family gatherings. Not with a confrontation, not with a speech. Just stop. Nathan nodded. Are you certain? I'm certain. He picked up the walnut and resumed sanding. Then we'll determine the rest together. That was all. No grand gesture, no dramatic vow. Just a man with sawdust on his hands assuring me he wasn't going anywhere. I composed the letter that evening. Professional letterhead, 3 paragraphs, effective immediately. I didn't slam the door. I simply stopped opening it. I personally delivered the letter to Davis Hardware on a Tuesday morning. The bell above the entrance chimed the same way it had since I was 11. My father was behind the counter organizing hardware into bins. I placed the envelope on the glass display case. What's this? He asked. My resignation from the bookkeeping. Effective immediately. Everything is current through this quarter. He opened it. Read it. His expression shifted from confusion to crimson in approximately 4 seconds. After everything we've done for you. I had been anticipating that line. What have you done for me, Dad? Specifically? He opened his mouth. Nothing emerged. Because the honest answer was that I had been providing for them, 7 years of service. And the return on my investment had been a seat at the end of the table and a $100,000 lesson in my ranking within the family. Margaret called that evening. You're making a terrible mistake. When Nathan abandons you with nothing, don't come crawling back. I I won't, I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. I didn't block their numbers. I just stopped answering. The calls came weekly, then monthly, then quarterly. Always the same tone. Never an apology. Always a request disguised as concern. I let them ring unanswered. Severing contact wasn't punishment. It was a tourniquet. I had been hemorrhaging from a wound they continued to insist didn't exist. The only path to healing was to stop standing in the place where I kept getting injured. If you've ever had to walk away from the people who should have been your foundation, you understand that silence following the final call. It's not peace. Not yet. It's the first breath after holding your head underwater. Walking away isn't giving up, it's choosing yourself over the people who never chose you. Nathan and I married 3 months later at the county courthouse. Total expense, $1,912. My dress came from a second-hand shop on Main Street. Ivory lace, slightly long in the hem. Perfect. Nathan wore his only suit and a tie his mentor had given him. Our witnesses were my college friend Emily and Walt, a retired contractor who had taught Nathan everything about structural integrity and clean joints. We celebrated at a local diner with chicken fried steak and sweet tea. Nathan carved our initials into the wooden booth with his pocket knife while the waitress pretended not to notice. That same week, Nathan finalized the purchase of a foreclosed property, a 3-bedroom ranch on a side street. Purchase price, $64,000. Warped floors, rotting porch supports, a kitchen that smelled like damp carpet and disappointment. Nathan examined it the way a surgeon examines a patient, already envisioning its potential. Our strategy was straightforward. He would renovate. I would manage the finances. Our first project. I established the spreadsheet that night. Cost projections, timeline, comparable sales within a 5-mile radius. Nathan sketched the renovation plans on graph paper at the kitchen table while I analyzed the figures on my laptop. Other couples register for fine china, I told him. He smiled. We registered for a power saw and a business license. 4 months later, we sold that property for $137,000, $47,000 in profit. Our first return on investment. I filed the capital gains paperwork. Nathan was already evaluating the next opportunity. The partnership that would transform our lives had officially commenced. Lauren's wedding occurred on a Saturday in September. I wasn't invited. Emily attended. She called me afterward, selecting her words carefully, the way you do when describing someone else's celebration to the person who wasn't included. Lakeside venue, 218 guests, a band that performed, orchids that wilted by the reception because no one had accounted for the Georgia humidity. Final cost, $89,000. My father delivered a toast about investing in the future. I imagine he believed it. Meanwhile, Nathan and I were finalizing our second project, a brick duplex near downtown. Purchase, $73,000. Renovation, $36,000. Sale, $162,000. Profit, $53,000. My sister had spent $100,000 on a single evening. Nathan and I generated $53,000 in 8 weeks. I didn't maintain score, but I'm a CPA. Numbers reside in my mind whether I invite them or not. Emily mentioned something else. Bradley had leased a new European vehicle the week before the wedding. To match the energy, he had told people at the reception. $750 monthly for a car he didn't own, to impress people he'd forget by the following year. I didn't judge. I simply filed it away the way I file everything, as patterns likely to compound. Nathan and I spent that September Saturday not at a wedding, but at a property auction in the next county. We lost the bid by $2,000, drove home, ate leftover chili, and went to bed early. The hardware store had begun experiencing difficulties by that point, but no one informed me, and I didn't inquire. 7 months after I departed Davis Hardware, my mother's number appeared on my phone. I was sitting in my car outside a property inspection, eating a granola bar and reviewing a contractor's estimate. I answered. I don't know why. Habit, perhaps. Or the ghost of a girl who still wanted her mother to speak the right words. Margaret didn't offer a greeting. Your father's back is causing him problems, she said. He can't manage inventory alone. And the new bookkeeper made errors on the quarterly filing. The IRS is asking questions. We may owe penalties. I waited. Counted the seconds in my mind. 3. 5. 8. No, how are you? No, we miss you. No, I apologize for what happened. My mother called me like you call a plumber. Only when there's a leak. I hope you find someone to assist you, I said into the phone. I'm not available. Silence. So you're really going to let your family struggle over some pride? It's not pride, Mom. It's a boundary. I ended the call, placed the phone on the passenger seat, and stared at the contractor's estimate until the numbers stopped swimming. I didn't feel victorious. I felt exhausted. 7 years of conditioning doesn't dissolve in 7 months. The guilt reflex fired, sharp, familiar, trained. My hands wanted to reach for the laptop and access their QuickBooks file. Nathan was waiting at home. He observed my expression the moment I entered. They called for your skills, he said. Not for you. He was correct. And the distinction between those two things was the difference between being family and being useful. I'd spent 7 years confusing the two. Year 1 concluded. I calculated the figures the way I calculate everything, precisely. 3 projects completed. Total profit, $131,000, net of taxes, fees, materials, and the one plumbing disaster that taught Nathan to always inspect the mainline before demolition day. I filed the paperwork for Morrison Property Group LLC on a Wednesday afternoon in March. Rebecca Morrison. I had adopted Nathan's surname, and seeing it on a business license felt like planting a flag. Nathan managed design, construction, and subcontractor coordination. I handled financing, permits, accounting, tenant screening, insurance, and everything else requiring a calculator and patience. We acquired a small property management company from a retiring couple. 6 rental units across town, mostly Section 8 tenants who paid reliably and simply wanted functioning plumbing. Purchase price, $345,000. Financed through a local credit union. I structured the deal to be cash flow positive from month 1. The arithmetic was clean. Nathan builds houses. I build plans. Together, we were constructing something neither of us could have accomplished alone. That spring, we discovered the land. 5 acres outside city limits, rolling hills, a cluster of mature oaks along the ridge. $79,000. Nathan walked the property boundary without speaking for 10 minutes. Then, this is where we'll build our home. I began maintaining a personal ledger around that time. Not for the business. I had QuickBooks for that. This one was different. I reviewed 7 years of Davis hardware files, my copies, my backups, my records, and cataloged every hour I'd worked, every tax return, every vendor negotiation, every payroll cycle. I assigned market rates to each task. I wasn't building a case. I was seeking clarity. 13 months after I stopped answering my parents' calls, Lauren called. I was in the middle of a tenant screening, background check, credit report, employment verification. Careful work, the kind you do when you understand that who you permit inside determines everything. I answered because the number was Lauren's. And she'd never called me before. Not once in 13 months. Rebecca. Her voice was strained. Mom and Dad are fighting constantly. Like really badly. The store is in trouble. I waited for the question I needed to hear. How are you? How's Nathan? How's your life? It didn't arrive. Dad hired some bookkeeper from an online listing. She messed up the payroll taxes. Something about misclassifying the part-timers as independent contractors. He owes the IRS $24,000 in penalties. $24,000. I could have identified that issue in a single afternoon. Lauren, I said, that sounds difficult. I hope Dad resolves it. Silence. Then, sharper, you could fix this. You know their system. You built their system. I used to, I said. I don't anymore. She didn't ask what I did now. Didn't inquire about the business, the properties, the life I'd constructed in the same town where she still lived and never visited. My sister called me the way you call technical support. Skip the pleasantries. Describe the error. Expect a resolution. You're being selfish, she said. No, Lauren. I'm being employed. The difference is that one of those comes with compensation. I ended the call, set the phone down, and returned to the background check. Some patterns are evident in the data. Lauren had always treated me as a resource, not a sister. And resources don't receive invitations to weddings. They get called when something breaks. I discovered the figure on a Tuesday in October. I was organizing my home office, the second bedroom that served as Morrison Property Group's headquarters, and withdrew the personal ledger from the filing cabinet. 47 pages. Every entry dated. Every hour logged. I had started it as an exercise in clarity. But what I found was something else entirely. 7 years of bookkeeping. Quarterly tax preparation. Annual filings with the State Department of Revenue. Payroll management for 4 employees. Vendor invoice reconciliation. Insurance renewal negotiations. Accounts receivable tracking. Cash flow forecasting. I assigned each service the current market rate for a licensed CPA in our region. Quarterly bookkeeping, $12,000 annually. Tax preparation, $4,500. Payroll management, $6,500. Vendor negotiations and cost savings, variable. But I documented every dollar I had saved them, the lumber supplier overcharge, the insurance renegotiation, the equipment lease I restructured in year 4 that saved them $1,900 annually. The total sat at the bottom of page 47. $249,000. That's what 7 years of free labor looked like when you finally calculate the invoice. I stared at the figure for a long time. My parents had given Lauren $100,000 for a wedding. They told me I didn't deserve assistance. And throughout that time, I had been subsidizing their survival to the tune of $250,000. I closed the ledger, returned it to the filing cabinet. Didn't post about it. Didn't call anyone. I told Nathan that evening. He looked at the number, looked at me. You were running their business, Rebecca. For free. And they said you didn't deserve help. I know. But this isn't about what they owe me. It's about what I owe myself. I never wielded that ledger as a weapon. I didn't need to. Something shifted after I found that number. Not overnight. More like the way a foundation settles. Slowly, permanently. Until one morning you realize the house sits differently. I stopped flinching when my parents' area code appeared on my phone. Stopped driving the long way through town just to avoid Main Street and the Davis Hardware sign. Stopped replaying my father's words at 3 o'clock in the morning when the house was quiet and my mind was loud. $249,000. The number liberated me. Not because I planned to use it, but because I finally possessed proof of what I'd always sensed but couldn't articulate. I wasn't the daughter who didn't deserve assistance. I was the daughter who had been providing assistance all along. The business continued expanding. Morrison Property Group closed on its 6th project that month. A craftsman bungalow on a side street that Nathan transformed from a dilapidated structure into a 3-bedroom showcase. We managed 14 rental units now. Annual revenue, $410,000. I hired our first employee, a part-time property inspector named Glenn, who reminded me of Nathan's mentor. Nathan and I broke ground on our house in November. He had devoted 4 months to the design, modern farmhouse, wraparound porch, reclaimed wood beams from the properties we'd renovated. Oak from the ranch project. Pine from the bungalow. Walnut from a duplex in the neighboring district. Every board carried a story. Nathan often said that. Every board has a story, just like us. The framing was completed before Christmas. I stood on the unfinished porch and watched the winter sun descend behind our oaks. I was building, not to prove anyone wrong, not to make a point. Just to prove myself right. 249,000. That's the number that transformed everything. Not because I used it, but because I finally perceived my own value in black and white. Your worth isn't determined by those who overlook you, it's proven by what you build without them. If you've ever questioned whether anyone recognized what you gave, stay with me. Because what happened when the person who held everything together walked away? That's the portion you need to hear. Year 2 was when the arithmetic stopped being impressive and started being undeniable. 8 projects completed. Average profit per project, 44,000. Total flip income, 352,000 before taxes. 14 rental units generating 9,200 monthly in net cash flow. 3 commercial renovation contracts signed. A dental office, a barbershop, and a co-working space in the historic district. Morrison Property Group's net worth exceeded 1.3 million. No family funding. No inheritance. No angel investor. Just a CPA's spreadsheet discipline and a carpenter's refusal to compromise. The house was materializing on the hillside. Framing completed. Roof installed. Electrical rough and finished. Nathan installed the windows himself. He'd located a supplier who offered high-efficiency glass at contractor rates. I spent evenings on the plywood subfloor of what would become our porch, laptop balanced on a sawhorse, reconciling accounts while Nathan operated the table saw in the workshop behind us. When I was 25, I believed helping my family for free was an investment, I told him one evening. It turns out the best investment I ever made was in a man with calloused hands and a clear conscience. He didn't look up from the baseboard he was routing. You're the one who made the figures work. We both made it work. The community was taking notice. We had hired local contractors, sourced materials from regional suppliers, sponsored the local youth baseball league. We were constructing something visible. The community charity banquet was approaching, the largest annual gathering in town. Morrison Property Group was already on the invitation list. I learned about the store's struggles the way you hear about most things in a small city, through someone who knew someone who had observed the signs. Our insurance agent mentioned it during a policy review. Davis Hardware is behind on their premiums. I had to send a cancellation notice last month. She didn't realize I was a Davis. I had been a Morrison for 2 years. I didn't correct her. I made some calls, discreet ones. A supplier I still knew from my bookkeeping days confirmed it. The store was in trouble. The replacement bookkeeper, the one hired online for $45,000 annually, had worsened the payroll tax situation. Missed quarterly estimated payments. Misfiled supplier invoices. Double paid 2 vendors. Total damage over 18 months, $69,000 in penalties and overpayments. My father's herniated disc had deteriorated. He was limited to 4 hours daily at the store, most of it seated on a stool behind the register, grimacing. Margaret, 59, was working the floor full-time for the first time in more than 20 years. She appeared exhausted whenever anyone mentioned her to me. And Lauren? Bradley was too occupied. Bradley's commission checks were being consumed by vehicle payments and credit card minimums. Lauren was attempting to help by posting the store's inventory on social media. 12 followers. 0 sales. I had addressed this in my resignation letter, paragraph 3. Without consistent financial oversight, vendor relationships and tax compliance will deteriorate within 12 to 18 months. I hadn't written it to be cruel. I'd written it because I'm a CPA. Forecasting risk is the profession. Every number I had predicted had materialized. The store was bleeding exactly as the spreadsheet had indicated it would. And the person who could have halted the hemorrhage was seated on a hillside outside town, constructing a house with the man they had deemed insufficient. My father appeared at our office on a Thursday afternoon. Morrison Property Group operated from a converted storefront downtown. Glass front, clean signage, 3 desks inside. I was reviewing a contractor's change order when the bell chimed and my father entered. First time I'd seen him in 22 months. He was thinner. Walking with a cane. The disc had deteriorated enough to require one. But his jaw was set in that familiar stubborn line. The jaw that said he was correct and the world would eventually agree. He surveyed the office, the framed business license, the property listings on the corkboard, Glenn at his desk reviewing comparable sales. You need to return and assist with the books, my father said. No greeting. Family supports family. I remained seated. Family also attends each other's weddings, Dad. He blinked. Whatever script he'd rehearsed in the vehicle, that line wasn't included. That was different. We were trying to protect you from what? I gestured at the office. The glass walls. The organized desks. The employees visible behind me. From constructing this? He stood there. The cane trembled slightly. Whether from anger or the disc, I couldn't determine. I didn't come here to argue. I came because we need assistance. I needed assistance too, I said. 3 years ago, you looked at me and said, I stopped. I didn't repeat the words. I didn't need to. They were already present in the room, louder than either of us. He turned and walked out. The bell chimed again. Glenn looked up. Everything all right? Yes, I said. He came for my skills. Not for me. I retrieved the change order and returned to work. Some accounts can't be reconciled. You close the file and move forward.